and welcome back to Briggs on Books. I know what our viewers are thinking. It was called Central Valley Authors just a couple weeks ago, but post-COVID, we had to learn this new Zoom technology. Now we're talking to authors from all over the world every day. And our next guest is, by the way, a fascinating guy, David Blackbird McKinsey. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, first of all, and I'm going to put the cover of your book up here for a second. First of all, you're an author.
Yes.
And, you're a whole bunch of things, which we're going to get into in a few minutes here. But your book, Sydney West, how long has that been out?
That's been about since January. But it was, I tell a lot of people this is my first novel. And then I tell them with slight cringe that it took about 8 years with a few rewrites. Which most people tell me, oh yeah, that's normal for a first novel, but since this last January, and I'm still excited about it.
Yeah, and it's out, and people can hold it and read it.
Definitely, yeah, it's available pretty much everywhere you can find books, anywhere from Amazon to you can get it at your library.
Yeah. Now, by the way, I'm putting up a picture of you selling the book at fair. You go to a lot of festivals, fairs, things like that, and
oh yeah, I do some gig work just to glue things together, but the vast majority of my work is at local markets, pop-up fairs, things like that.
Yeah, and by the way, I encourage our viewers to go to David's website because it says everywhere he's going to be. By the way, I have on the screen a work of art, a man with antlers.
Oh, yes. I do a lot of... I'm definitely a Halloween person. Which, in stepping into the way I like to do my booth, most of the time I joke about that with people, like, oh, you can obviously tell. But I like a lot of folklore, mythology. I like learning about different cultures, as long as I can, the best of my ability, do that with respect. Because I have my own cultures and everybody has their own, and kind of remixing them as respectfully as I can. So it's not just Halloween in October, but for example, there's an event I'm doing in July that's Halloween themed, and that's spot on to what I'm trying to do in general.
And by the way, I'm going to put up a picture here, and I saw a bunch of similar pictures. It's in white, and the image is in white, and the background's dark. These are some of your art.
Yes, that's... if I'm thinking of the section of my work that you described, I like to not just kind of, since there's a lot of overlap in folklore, especially regionally, and I try to remix that as respectfully as possible. I also have a background in fine arts. I did a couple years of more formal art school, but since I know what people might think of as the correct way to do things, I like to study the classical art, and I don't get out to museums as much as I'd like to, but I like to take the correct way to do things and turn it on its head or rearrange it. Mm-hmm. So a big part of my visual art is making it familiar enough where you feel comfortable looking at something that's fine art or very traditional, like sketchbook kind of stuff, but move it a little, like 3 inches to the left, so it sparks more curiosity. Yeah. Because you think you know what you're looking at, but you need to look further to make sure.
And again, for our viewers, spend some time at this website, blackbirdparlor.com, and I got a lot out of it watching, looking at David's work. And in fact, I'm introducing you as an author who also does art, but the art was first, right? You're doing art and going out and selling it, and then the book came out later.
I have a weird relationship with time, but when I really sit down and think about it, it's, mostly the visual art came first, because I was, long story short, homeschooled, which is a big mixed bag of things, but that allowed me to really think about visualizing things, and I was very much encouraged to go out and figure out what I liked. So the visual art came first, sketchbooks came first, because it was easier to tote those around rather than notebooks. So that was the foundation for kind of finding the style that I like to present to people, because I'm a very visual person, and even in Sydney West, I try to set the tone, not just tell you what's happening, especially for because a big theme in the story is neurodivergence, people who aren't really what's considered average psychology. And there's some people who have a condition called aphantasia, where like they don't have a mind's eye. So I try to incorporate that into certain things as well as lots of other themes and labels. So I think that really helped me figure out how to set a style and bring people along rather than trying to make people do all the work. Because there's a happy medium in there of things I want to hand people, but you always have to fill in the gaps.
Yep. Now let me ask you this, put you on the spot, because I didn't tell you we're going to talk about this, but can you tell us where you're going to be in June? Are there any places you're going to be in June where people can see your art and buy your book?
I try not to put events on my events page on the website until I have them absolutely locked in. Yeah. So if someone isn't able to find me in June, there's some other places. But I am doing Seattle Pride at the end of the month. And as per another photo that I had shown you, I have a very bright orange tent. Those are the directions that I try to give people. But until then, this Sunday, I was trying to think, what day is it? This Sunday, I try to do every market possible for an organization called the Pacific Northwest Witches Market, which is a very open atmosphere. It's not, because I try to keep in mind not everybody is of the same communities I am, so it's very open. It's not overly spooky. You're not going to find like ram heads everywhere and certain kinds of imagery that make a lot of people uncomfortable. But it's a lot of fun. There's crystals and tarot readers, and you can also find mine and plants and things like that.
Is that every month?
It's every couple months. They're trying to do an uptick in at least the number of times they do it per year, but because there's like witchy holidays, metaphysical holidays tend to follow the seasons. They do it every couple months, maybe every season or so.
Now, and I said this before we came on the air, but by the way, the website is fantastic and says all these places you're going to be. So for our viewers, if you want to meet David, go to the website and it'll tell you a lot of the places he's going to be. But it seems like you're the hardest working author we've ever had on the show. You're always out there doing something, selling your book. And
thank you. I definitely appreciate that. It's for several years I worked in retail, but also if you can get your hands on my book or go to my website in the About, I'm not compatible with a lot of super formal contexts.
Yeah.
Some of that, well, I would say most of that is ADHD. Some of that is other things like PTSD. There's been specific events where there have been disagreement in communication styles. But I got into working for myself largely out of necessity and learning more and more about different fields I wanted to go into. Even if they had more of a degree of independence, there was always a point that I found, such as in publishing, since Sydney West is self-published, which I know has a reputation, but the more I looked into traditional publishing and the more I would talk to professionals in traditional publishing, there would be more and more just mixed messages that I wasn't comfortable with. So in being self-employed, there's always a sense of internal screaming of, oh no, I am my own safety net. But it's also given me more license to, if I come across a new idea, I can pursue that, and I'm more accountable to myself, pass or fail.
Usually, I got off track because usually on this show I ask authors all about their book, but you're the most fascinating guy. You have all these things going on. So just let's take a minute and go back to the book. Tell us a little bit about the book. Tell us about the genre. Tell us who should be reading this book.
Generally, I'd consider it literary fiction because I do try to cross over a bunch of different genres, just what's appropriate for the story. But and trying to nail it down a little bit further because I understand the necessity for that, at least professionally. I'd say it's psychological horror with a little dash of sci-fi, because it is first in the universe that I want to expand. And I would recommend it really to people who, at least for me, I'd say people who grew up with things like The Twilight Zone of Rod Serling. Especially when I bring it to markets and I say horror, I try to preface with, I'm not a fan of blood and guts. It's not slasher, things like that. It's more in the realm of, like I think I said earlier, it's familiarity, but off kilter. More like Twilight Zone, less like Saw or like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or something like that.
It sounds like it's going to be smart, like Twilight Zone. It was clever, smart writing. It was.
I hope so, yes.
Yeah. Anybody can read this book. Kids, can kids read it? I'm thinking of teenagers.
I would say probably older kids. Every kid is different. Every parenting style is different. But I'd probably say, at least in my perception, maybe start at like 14, 15. Yeah. There have been younger kids who've picked it up because I did illustrate the cover. It has kind of a, just because of how I like to draw, it has kind of a Goosebumps-esque look to it. But I was telling a little boy the other day, it depends on what his parents are okay with him reading, but maybe if he's a little bit older, like 14, 15, and then their parents came in and we talked about it.
Okay. David, we're way past time, but I could talk to you for hours.
Sorry about that.
No, it's our fault because I keep asking you more and more questions about this great life. It just looks like you're having a great life in the Pacific Northwest, going to these festivals, selling your art, selling your books. And I was going to call you artist and author, but I'm going to say artist, author, and businessman because you're doing it like a business, and it looks like you're supporting yourself.
So far, it's good, even with the internal screaming.
All right, David. Last thoughts for our viewers?
I touched on it for just a second, but Sydney West is essentially about identity, finding your place in the balance between what people think about you and what you think about yourself, with some fun stuff like tarot deck hallucinations and some mad science. So.
Nice. All right. Anyway, I'm going to read it, mostly because I'm inspired by the author, and I want our viewers to go to this Instagram, Whiskey Tara Foxtrot. Go to the webpage, blackbirdparlor.com. Thank you, David Blackbird McKinsey, for being on our show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll be back with more authors right after this.